Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to greet you today. My name is Fernando Little, and I proudly serve as the Chief Diversity Officer for Atrium Health, and always in awe and in appreciation of sharing the virtual stage with my brother, Adrian Taylor, who I will let him introduce himself as well.
And I appreciate that, Fernando. It's my partner in crime. I'm Adrian Taylor in Dayton, Ohio at Premier Health, and I'm happy and excited to be here. This is our second year doing this, so it looks like we're doing something right. And I'm excited to share with you brothers today.
And Adrian, I just believe this will be an extension of a conversation that you and I have all the time, right? And so, we're just giving a virtual window to whomever's on the call today, whoever decided to join this webinar of things that we talk about all the time. We do try to live in that role of being our brother's keeper. And I will say that I appreciate having Adrian as someone that we can be honest with, have transparent conversations, but also be real with one another. And that's what today's conversation is about. The title, Locked Out, Promote Me, it's about having real conversations with one another that build us up, but also give us courageous feedback so that we can grow and so that we can be our best selves every day. And we have to be willing to do that with one another, particularly in times like today. So we hope that today's conversation will give you some insight, some nuggets. We've all been at that point where we were frustrated, where it looks like there's a bottleneck in the trajectory for ourselves, right? Where it looks like other people that don't necessarily look like us are just strolling through, their career and on this accelerated path, right? But I will tell you that there are things that we can do to polish our trajectory, to slick our path so that we can accelerate as well. We just got to be willing to have these transparent conversations like we're going to have today. So Adrian and I had been talking about a connect to purpose. I believe a very powerful connect to purpose that will kick us off in terms of our discussion today. And so I'm gonna turn it over to Adrian, who's gonna walk through our connect to purpose for our session today.
Man, Brother Fernando, thank you for those kind words, and it's reciprocated. I mean, you and I have had some really transparent, challenging conversations. It's not all laughs and giggles. We get it in, and I think in that space, I've gotten better. It's that proverbial biblical statement that iron sharpens iron, and it's such a true statement, such a true statement. And every person on this call, you need to find somebody to help you sharpen your iron, and Fernando is my guy. I've got to share with you though, this connect to purpose, a specific picture. Some of you who follow basketball may be familiar with this young man on your screen presently. He's the middle child of the Ball family. LiAngelo, affectionately referred to as Jello. And why he is our connect to purpose is probably what you're asking. And let me put it to you like this: when you look at the global narrative, and Fernando and I were just talking about this. Last year, we were in a place of almost global unity and protest, and people were doing some significant things in the space of social justice. And we were having this dialogue together, black, white, man, female. I mean, it was everything that we needed, and it was great to see. But it seems like we're in a bit of pandemic fatigue, mask fatigue, indoor fatigue, work from home fatigue. And a lot of people are participating in the Great Resignation. And so we're in a different chapter, a different spirit, if you will, in our communities. And while social injustice is still a mission critical for many of us, it's not necessarily the prevailing spirit in a lot of communities right now. So this young man, where the connection is with Jello, if you will. That Jello, many know, had a career at UCLA. And he made a critical mistake. He made an error in judgment while they were overseas, and actually did some shoplifting, and it tainted his brand, if you will. It really did. And so where he thought he was going to the NBA, like his older brother, who now plays for the Chicago Bulls, I believe. That's Melo. And then his younger brother just won the Rookie of the Year last year and plays for the Hornets. This trajectory, referring back to the term that Fernando used, declined. And he wasn't seeing, if you will, the promotion that he thought he would receive. His decision making and other things contributed to him not going to the NBA, which was his dream. So he had to sit. He had to sit, reflect, think, and come up with a different plan, a different strategy in order for him to become promotable. So what we've seen in this narrative and what the purpose is, the connection is, are just a few nuggets before we really jump into the meat of the discussion. But let me share with you what he has done. And by the way, the NBA season has not started. But in his mind, I believe that it has. And Fernando, by all means, chime into this at any point in time. You know how you and I talk. But one of the things that we've seen with Jello is in the offseason, he has made his mind up that he is going to be promotable. And in doing so, he's done three things. One thing he's done is showed up differently, even though the season hasn't begun. In fact, training camp hadn't begun, and we had already started seeing things online that Jello was showing up to the Charlotte Hornets practice facility with his brother doing the pre-work before the preseason began. And what I'm saying is his show up showed the owners that he was serious and about his business. This is before the big meeting. This is before the outing, before a decision is made, that this guy had decided to proverbially show up early. Work starts at 8. He's showing up at 7, 6:30 to show that I could turn the lights on, I can brew the coffee and get these reports to you before anybody else can. And by the way, they'll be error-free. This is his mentality. So if anything else, connecting purpose is you need to show up before anybody else if you want to continue your forward momentum, your trajectory, your promotability in the right direction, is show up before anybody else. Two, what we've shown is, and me and Fernando had a fantastic conversation about this, he's making his brother better. The owners of the Charlotte Hornets have said that because Jello has shown presence, a quiet spirit, if you will, a confidence, if you will, that his younger brother, LaMelo, who struggled a little bit because he's young, out of a high school situation, fresh into the Hornets last year, that he played ball well, but having somebody nearby that knows him and understands him has really helped his younger brother become better during training camp. So my question to you is, as you want to become promotable, are you making anybody better, especially your brother, those who are close to you in your inner circle? Can people say because you have showed up that somebody else is showing up better and differently in the situation? And then thirdly, what I read about Jello, and again, the season hasn't begun, he's just increasing his promotability, is that coaches are saying that his movements on the court during the game, and preseason is over with now, if I'm not mistaken, he's shown the ability to think 20 steps ahead of the play, 20 steps ahead of the opposing team. So my question to you is, when you think about being promoted, are you doing the things that are going to help you stay 20 steps ahead of whatever problem or issue that you and your organization is dealing with? What are you doing to put yourself in a position where you can read the play? And we're going to talk about being able to read the room. You can read the play and come up with a solution to put the ball in the goal for your organization, for your department, for your situation, so that you increase your promotability. Gentlemen, I just wanted to share that with you, that you've got to really show up differently when it comes to increasing your promotability. You've got to make people better when it comes to increasing your promotability. You've got to have a future focus. You really got to lock in and be able to think 20, 30, 40, 50 steps ahead in order to have the kind of contribution that's going to help your situation become better.
Yes. So Adrian, you knocked that out of the park. That was a home run discussion on Jello. I will have to be completely transparent and say You know, as a native of Charlotte and a Charlotte Hornets fan, I have seen the direct impact of Jello and his brother. His brother balled out. You know what I'm saying? And rightfully earned the Rookie of the Year honor. And I love the fact that you emphasize what are we doing to make our brother better, even in the midst of adversity, and even in the midst of disruption in our organizations. How are we showing up to make our brothers better? And then, like you said, how are you staying ahead of the game? How are you staying 20 steps ahead, anticipating the next move so you always show up prepared? You're always there at 6:30 before the lights come on, saying, "Oh, I knew this was coming, and I'm ready. I'm prepared." You know, so you nailed that, Adrian. Thank you for that connected purpose, and I think it's a great segue into the remainder of our conversation. So when you look at what we're going to talk about today, and Adrian, we can probably go to the next slide. This is what we want to highlight in the discussion today. We definitely want to talk about how do you maximize your current existing assignment? How do you get the most out of the seat that you're in, even though we have aspirations to get to that next level? How do you maximize that assignment and at the same time optimize your personal brand that's going to be complementary to your trajectory, right? Then we're going to talk a little bit about the dynamic in the workforce and how do you navigate sometimes challenging conversations or a challenging climate or a climate that has a tendency to make us emotional. And then we forget about how we're coming across when we talk, or we forget about how we're coming across when we write that email, right? So how do you navigate that, right? And Adrian's laughing because he and I both have had to call each other and calm each other down before we go back to the meeting or before we write the email to respond, right? But there are some things that we can do to control that workforce dynamic. And then we want to talk about elevating business acumen. How do you know for a fact, without a shadow of a doubt, that even in your role and in the seat that you're in now, that you're impacting the business? How do you quantify that and articulate your impact to the business? And then how do you leverage that knowledge of the business to guide your trajectory in the leadership hierarchy? So we're going to talk about that as well. As we're talking, and Adrian and I, we can talk about this all day long. We would love to interact with you. Feel free to send questions in the chat. You don't necessarily have to wait to the end of the conversation. We will try to protect some time before the end of the conversation to make sure there are no questions that are out there. But if you have questions as the discussion is going, feel free to put them in the chat, and we will do our best to address them in the chat. Because that lets us know you're engaged and you're interacting. And for Adrian and myself, it lets us know that you're getting something out of the discussion. That's what gives us an intrinsic reward about this discussion, is that we want you to benefit from it. So this is our outline. This is what we want to cover today, but we certainly want to address anything that's burning inside you around this topic. So having said that, let's talk about that current assignment, Adrian, and especially in the midst of a crisis and in the midst of the pandemic and the need for us to be solutions oriented. How important, Adrian, is it that we, from the seat that we sit in, even though we can see ourselves at that next level, we can taste that promotion. We love to see it in that check, right? In the next check. Even though we can feel it and see it and take, what can we be doing right now from the seat that we're in to maximize the opportunity, optimize, our what's in front of us right now?
Fernando, I'm cracking up over here because our conversations are rich, and I wish the folks in the call could hear some of those dialogues. But it's the story that we tell ourselves, man. Let's just take a swath of what's happening in our nation. We had a break where people were coming out of the mask. Now variant D is locking us back down once again. And again, I alluded to in the beginning that the difficulty of having all the different types of fatigues. I mean, my wife's been working from home for 18 months. You know, she's had it up to here. My children want to get out, and you know, we've got all these things, and we as men have got to think through the fact that we're in those fatigues as well. When we're feeling that type of fatigue as well. But when it comes to your promotability, just kind of locking in on our theme and our title, that you have got to be the one that looks at your situation and tells yourself a different story than everybody else that may be in a similar situation, that may see that situation as bleak, as difficult. We're working extra hours. We're trying to manage things from home. We have, it could feel like unrealistic goals. You have got to be driven for your purpose and what you believe your destiny is, and that's to receive that promotion. So instead of looking at the being a negative Nancy, or they call it a Debbie Downer, you've got to tell yourself a different story. I'm a Christian by faith, and I'll share with you from the Old Testament about David, and he was in a similar situation, and he had to encourage himself in the Lord, is what the Bible says, that he was up against odds where his situation was bleak. The men that followed him, they were no longer following him, and those men were discouraged, and he had to dig deeper and tell himself a different story, and he utilized his faith to tell that story, and through that utilization, through leveraging his faith, he was able to be innovative and come up with a plan that was going to yield victory. So my question for you is, what is your plan to yield victory? What is the story that you're telling yourself? This is really a setup for you to go up, right? There's too many people, probably 80% of the people that we surround ourselves with, that are telling themselves the story about the pandemic and how difficult it is. And it's going to be up to you to Google, to research, to read, to be a part of something that's happening on LinkedIn, or sign up for a free webinar, or find yourself an accountability partner, or reach out to somebody you haven't reached out to show up differently in your current assignment. What can you do with your current assignment that's going to increase? And me and Fernando just had this conversation. This spills directly into it, guys, to increase your brand, right? Look at your current assignment as an opportunity, a platform, if you will, to do something really significant in your career and your aspirations to become more in your current organization. You have to look at this from this standpoint. Am I doing all the things necessary in the pandemic, and even coming out of the pandemic, perhaps to a new norm, that when I come out, they're going to look at me and say, how did he perform in the toughest times of the organization? Which obviously, right, Fernando, you could chime in, it's probably during the pandemic right now. How are you showing up? Are you showing up exasperated? Are you showing up late to the meetings? Are you barely getting on the call? Do you smile? Do you provide people with a radiated energy that's lifting up other people like Jello? Are you making your brother better? Or are you taking the time to have a meeting after the meeting and cut somebody down, or put something in the chat that's not a value add? How are you maximizing your existing opportunity? Are you being put in front of new leaders that you never had before? Are you creating a new narrative in front of those leaders that would suggest that you have a lot more to offer? You have really got to look at your current situation as a platform to move up, not stagnate, or even worse, go down lower. It's about you and what you do and how you show up. But we can tell ourselves that story about how you're being managed, not being paid enough, these hours. And I get it. Fernando and I, we work in healthcare. We get it like others probably don't. But you have got to be focused on your current situation and how it can elevate you to a new situation in the toughest of times. Gentlemen, I hope that makes sense, because ultimately, in order to optimize your personal brand, you got to have a brand in the first place. And believe me, you have one. And you maybe they didn't tell you this. It's either a good brand or a bad brand. You know, Fernando and I have talked about what a lot of organizations do with something called talent mapping. where they bring leaders in and they talk about different employees and their promotability, if you will, and in regards to what development they need. So it's a matter of how are you showing up? So when they have those conversations, those meetings after the meetings, or sometimes it's the meeting before the meeting, what are they saying about your brand? Are you dependable? Do you show up again with innovative thoughts? Are you contributing with something that's value add? Are you the person that they can count on to go the extra mile when necessary? Can you champion efforts even when you know the response typically is going to be something negative from your peers and still maintain some level of fortitude and grit in the face of adversity? These are the types of things that Fernando's really going to lay out some competencies. I can't wait till we get to the next slide. But these are the things that you really have to consider is maximizing your current situation so that you build on the brand that you currently have. And let me just say this before I punt it to Fernando. And listen to me closely on this. You could have a bad brand like Jello. The brother was at UCLA, great school, was overseas and made a bad decision, right? Tarnished his brand. But because of his work ethic, because he's maximizing his current assignment, his brand is beginning to change, at least with one organization. And he's looking at creating a promotable situation for himself. So I've got to put that in your lap. Even if you have a bad brand, you can come out of that situation if you concentrate on maximizing your current assignment.
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna punt it over to Fernando. Sorry, Fernando, kind of got good to me, man.
I know it. It was good. That was good. Yeah, that was another home run on that one. Only thing I would add, and you nailed it, Adrian, is that whole solutions orientation. And you got there. It's like in terms of being a part of, the environment that's progressive, right? You don't need to be viewed as part of the group that's pulling the environment down. You covered that. You also need to be seen as an innovative, solutions-oriented person. So even in the role that you're in, master what you're doing now. And even if we're calling out issues and problems, because this is a new normal for everybody, right? Now we're calling it the next normal. You can quantify what the opportunities are and still bring solutions so that you're viewed as a solutions oriented person. That's how you also maximize where you are right now. But Adrian, you knocked that one out of the park. I could tell you was feeling it. I was feeling it too. So that was good. Maximize your existing assignment. Optimize your personal brand. We want to move into this next part of the discussion around controlling the workforce dynamic, because we also know that a lot of times, maybe because of the culture, maybe because of the climate, maybe because of circumstantial things, the fatigue that Adrian was talking about, that the dynamic is not the easiest one to manage. But here's another way you can show up strong and show up leaderly and show up promotable is when you make sure that your emotional intelligence is in check, that you're able to read the room and know what the elephants in the room may be, right? And then you got to check yourself personally on what those elephants are, right? And challenge your own personal assumptions, but get into a good place of where you are emotionally, because what you don't want is for that emotion to spill over into your capacity to tackle the situation in an unimpacted way. And let me say that again. You have to make sure that your emotion doesn't get in the way of you tackling the circumstance at hand, the root cause of the problem. And a lot of times, that's one of our downfalls. We're emotional people. And we feel, and guess what? We probably have a reason to be emotional. You know what I'm saying? Because, there's all kinds of data out there that substantiates that there are inequity. We're in a health equity crisis. We should be emotional about that. There's a racial wealth gap that's real. We should be emotional about that. There is evidence that shows who's being impacted from this economic mobility situation and who's being adversely impacted. We should be emotional about that, right? However, when you're in the position to really channel that emotion to a productive person, to a productive purpose. So let me say that again. When you're in a position to channel that emotion to a productive purpose, you got to really be able to isolate the issue at hand and make sure that emotion doesn't get in the way of what you're trying to do. So how do you do that, Fernando? That's easier said than done. I get it. It's easier said than done. But one of the ways that and I promise you it works. It sounds, in this particular case, it's probably going to sound harder than what it is, but I promise you that it works. So all of you have been in courageous conversations, and you've been in situations, hopefully, where you've been provided a safe place at work to express how you feel based on some of the things that we've witnessed over the past 18 months. If you have not been given that platform, I certainly hope your organization finds a way to give you that platform so that you can have that community of support and express how some of the instances that we've witnessed with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the Asian series of crime in the Asian community, the pandemic crisis, everything that we've experienced over the past 18 months. Hopefully you have had a chance to be able to contribute to a courageous conversation. But now let me ask you a question. Have you exercised courageous listening? Do you participate in the courageous conversation just so you can say what you have to say and what you're feeling? Or do you participate in the conversation to courageously listen? And this is where I offer you, there are 3 types of listening. There's a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3 type of listening, particularly in the workplace. And think about which one you are. As I describe these levels, think about what type of listening you gravitate to. And this is in no judgment zone, so I don't, you're not going to be judged for which one, but I just want you to, for self-awareness, to think about what type of listener. So level 1 listener is the me listener. So the person whom is talking, and you're listening to that as a level 1 listener, you're listening for everything that applies to you, how you relate to the matter, how those experiences mirror your experiences, and how everything that's being said impacts your world right now. That's a level 1 listener, right? And I want you to think about the pros and cons of being a level 1 listener, right? Level 2 listener, they call it a recorder. Basically, or technical listening. You're listening to repeat every adjective, every detail of the conversation. So like you're listening so intently that you can repeat back exactly what they said. Every adjective, every numerical description, every qualitative description, almost like you're the scribe, right? That's technical listening. Then level 3 listening, sometimes referred to as epic listening, is when you have processed the information both verbally and non-verbally. You've paid attention to tone, you paid attention to emotion, you paid attention to any of the non-verbal communication as much as the verbal. You, in the process of listening to what they've said, you've connected it to the issue at hand, and then you've also challenged your own personal assumptions against the issue at hand and reconciled where you stand personally, but you've also quantified the core issue of the problem. That's level 3. That's level 3 listening. That's courageous listening. I would encourage us as much as possible to try to pursue that level 3 listening. My brother Adrian though reminded me, sometimes, Fernando, you got to toggle all 3. Sometimes you may have to toggle all 3, right? But I will tell you that the way to maintain emotional intelligence in a very volatile situation is to really challenge yourself to be a level 3 listener, an epic listener, right? So that you then have the ability, you've listened in such a way that you already know how it applies to you and you've reconciled your emotion against it. So now you can tackle the core root of the problem. You know what I'm saying? That's epic listening. And so I want to challenge us to be more of a courageous listener so that we can manage the workforce dynamic. And if you're seen as someone that can do that, actively listen, respond appropriately, channel emotion to a productive purpose, that's promotable. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands where we were there. Adrian, anything else to add to that one?
Man, you're killing the game right now. Let me tell you, even though I've heard this before, I still wrote it down again. And brothers, I want to encourage you to write down some nuggets. You should have 4 or 5 things that you can share with somebody else after a call like this. And I'm gonna capitalize on something you said, Fernando. It is promotable when you do these things, but when you don't do these things, they're watching. Oh, he's too emotional. Did you hear what they said about the racism thing, or what they said about that particular patient? He's emotional. He's not ready for leadership. They are watching and taking mental notes.
Yeah, that's spot on, Adrian. So we're going to move into our last topic, and then hopefully open it up for any questions. And I don't know if Kendall is on. If I hope we hadn't missed any questions in the chat thus far, but we want to definitely move into the last part of our discussion, which is around business acumen. And we talked earlier around understanding the business, knowing the business. It's very important for you to understand that if you do not know how your enterprise, how your organization generates revenue, that's an issue. You definitely got to be able to understand how the net operating revenue is generated, how the profitability of your organization. You really have to understand that at a very high level. And I know sometimes we work for big organizations and all we're focused on is the job and the job that I do. And sometimes we don't care what it means to the organization. You got to be able to connect what you do every day back to the profitability of the organization. Because that puts you in a seat to be innovative. That puts you in a seat to be part of process improvement. That puts you in a seat to then, like we said, slick that trajectory for you so that you can contribute in a broader scope and in a broader capacity because you know the business. So business acumen is incredibly important, especially, and we're going to talk about why that's important when you think about some other leadership behaviors that companies look for. So a lot of times I get the question, Fernando, well, I interviewed for 20, 25 other leadership roles and I don't get anywhere. And a lot of times my questions go back to what evidence of leadership behavior did you demonstrate or articulate in the interview? Did you demonstrate some of the behaviors that other C-suite executives in your organization have demonstrated to get promoted? That's something that I want all of us to watch. What are the leadership behaviors that seem to be exhibited, and maybe I should say the positive leadership. I hope we're not rewarding crazy leadership behaviors. That just makes me nervous. I hope we're not doing that, Adrian, at Premier. But what are the positive leadership behaviors that seem to be rewarded in your organization. So we'll go to the next slide. Here are some that are common that we need to think about as we chart a path to our next leadership role. As we say, I'm ready to be promoted, here are some of the leadership behavior, contemporary leadership behaviors that companies are looking for when they are choosing the next cadre of leadership for their organization, the next generation of leaders for their organization. First, you've got to be able to think critically and strategically. So that's beyond just knowing your job description and mastering the essential functions of your job. That's doing what Adrian said, staying 20 steps ahead, 10 steps ahead, being able to connect with your consumer market, your customer base, being able to think like our guy Jeff at Amazon. What's his last name, Adrian? Bezos, something. The guy at Amazon, we should know his name because, yes, exactly. We should. He's not thinking about how we're accessing his site right now and how I think it's great that I can just push Amazon on my phone and pick in 2 clicks, I've ordered it. I've swiped and ordered and I'm done. He's not thinking about how easy that is for me. He's thinking 10, 15 years ahead. What am I going to do? Well, what do I have to do to keep Fernando engaged with Amazon? You know what I'm saying? That's thinking critically and strategically. How can I anticipate what Fernando needs as my customer right now? What is his patterns been? What is his purchase patterns been? What's his lifestyle? All this demographic information it shapes how we think strategically. External factors, competitive forces, all those things. You got to be able to think critically and strategically about how all of that impacts your organization, impacts your department, impacts your function, and you got to be able to strategically plan around that. So next time you interview, make sure you have an example of a time you had to think critically and strategically about a project, about a workforce issue, about a product issue. Thinking critically and strategically is important. Envisioning and enacting the future. You have to be a visionary. Leaders are visionary. And most of you that's gone to graduate school in business, you understand the difference between leadership and management, right? Managers are taskmasters, task-oriented. They're good at mobilizing people to get the work done. Leaders are visionaries, right? And so you got to be able to envision and enact the future based on what is thriving, what's innovative, and what's going to sustain your industry for the years to come. Connecting and collaborating across the enterprise. You've got to be able to work with people beyond your department, beyond your team. You got to be able to connect across the enterprise. So in healthcare, my team is the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, but we've got to be able to reach across to some of our service line leaders in cardiology or in surgery, or some of our HR partners in talent acquisition, or in HRIS to get our work done. So you've got to be someone that people would want to work with. So don't be that person that shows up to the meeting and people start to roll their eyes because they're like, he's not a good partner. She's not a good partner. She's going to say no to everything. She's going to complain about. Don't be that person. Be such that they want to work with you. Because
Yellow, make your brother better. I mean, you're talking about it, man.
Better. There you go. Yeah. So that means make sure if you have a deliverable in the project plan and it's a cross-functional project plan, deliver that on time. Maybe try to deliver it a day or two early. When you have to speak up and represent your area, do so in a progressive way, in an encouraging way, but also, be informative. You know what I'm saying? Be the person that people want to work with. Okay. And that'll help you connect and collaborate across the enterprise. Definitely show that you can build and lead high-performing, diverse teams. Talent management in organizations and in enterprises is a huge, huge promotable factor right now. They've got to know that you are a talent manager, that talent gravitates to you, and that you know what to do with it. You know what I'm saying? So you've got to be able to demonstrate that I know how to develop people for the next level. I am comfortable. Now, this is a big one. I'm comfortable hiring people that are smarter than me. That's hard for some people. That's hard for some people, but I will tell you, everybody that I interview to be in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, if you're smarter than me, you got a good shot at getting it. Because I know that that's talent that the organization will benefit from, that will then create an asset base of human capital that the organization will say, whoa, we've just got this talent pool over there in diversity, equity, and inclusion that can do just about anything. You know what I'm saying? That's a better reflection on you as a talent manager, as someone that knows how to build and lead high-performing teams. So definitely, you put that in your portfolio of skill sets of like, how do I pour in to the teams that I lead? How do I develop them? How do I get them excited about being top talent in the organization? So that, from a performance management perspective and a talent management perspective, you now have requisite experience in that. You can articulate, yes, I'm a talent manager, and this is what I've done. I love to be able to say in an interview, yes, I hired Andrew, and he's a VP over at Union West now. You know what I'm saying? And so I love to be able to talk about the success of the people that have worked with me, and even worked for me. So builds and leads high-performing teams. The last one there, understands and shapes the external environment. This means that you have to operate like you impact the market, not that you respond to the market, that you impact the market. And if you impact the market, if your organization shapes the external environment, that means that you're innovative, that you're cutting edge, that you're leading, not lagging in the market. I will go back to the time when I used to lead the compensation team. So I have an HR background primarily, and then I transitioned into diversity, equity, inclusion. And I remember, because our hospital system is the largest in the region, and everybody used to watch what nurses were making, right? But nobody would change their base pay for nursing until our hospital system raised our range. And then when we raised our range, then everybody else, would raise their nursing pay, because we were shaping the external environment. We were showing that we had the human capital intelligence, the market intelligence to do the right thing at the right time in terms of pay and compensation. So you can do the same thing for your function, just viewing yourself as not necessarily someone that responds to the market. And sometimes you may need to respond to the market, especially given if your market share or where you are in the market. But leaders envision themselves as shaping the external environment, not responding to it. So that's just something to think about. The last thing that we'll say about business acumen, and this is the last slide that we have, and then we'll open it up to any Q&A, is understand what your organization's talent planning process is. And what I'm telling you is your organization more than likely has a talent management process. And when I say talent management, this is where succession planning happens. This is where planning around leader development happens. This is where selection and grooming of the next C-suite leaders happen. And a lot of times it's based on a non-box just like this, where they're going to assess your performance and your potential. So that means that you have to be mindful of how you're executing in the job that you're in right now, that you're knocking it out of the park, and you can see how that's rated on the x-axis here. Are you a low, moderate, or high performer on the x-axis? And then the potential assesses what's your trajectory, what's your potential for growth in the organization. Are you well placed and you'll stay well placed, or do you show signs that you can function at the next level, or 2 levels higher, or 3 levels higher? And so you really need to, all of us need to be trying to get to that top right quadrant. If you want to be promoted, you need to land in that top right quadrant. And they call that stars in this example, stars, because that person has high potential and they're high performance. And I will tell you, in some organizations, people that are in that box are sometimes considered for positions not 1 level up, but even 2 levels up, because that's how good they're performing. And that's how much potential that they have. But I want you to have some perspective of where you fall on this non-box. And then I want you to use this information to go back to your leader and say, what does our talent planning process look like? What does our succession planning look like? Do you have an idea of what my potential, what my potential rating is, where I fall on the non-box? Because you could be thinking you're doing well and you're in one of these red boxes and you didn't even know it. And that's affecting what? Your promotability.
That's right.
So if you're not in one of the green boxes, then the conversation is, what do I need to do to enhance my performance? What do I need to do to enhance my development as a leader and my potential as a future leader in this organization, a future senior leader in this organization? So Adrian and I wanted to just share this with you. Several of you probably know about the non-box, but definitely wanted to make it real for you. I think I read somewhere where at least 70% of the top performing companies have a talent planning process similar to this. And so you really need to know where you fall on this and how you can get to one of those green boxes. So that pretty much wraps up the areas we wanted to discuss. Right now, Adrian, I think it'd be good to open it up for just any questions that anybody may have about anything that we talked about. Also understand this is the Vegas call, right? So if you want to ask something confidentially or talk about something, please know that we respect your privacy and your confidence. So nothing will be shared outside of this call, but we certainly want to give you a chance to ask any questions that you may have about anything we talked about.
This is Kendall with Diversity MBA. Just to let the audience know, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat box, or if you have audio capabilities, you can turn on your mic and ask them like that. But to start off, I do have a question for our panelists, Adrian and Fernando. For a hypothetical example, say that you're just entered into the corporate field, like you're relatively new, but you do strive for more leadership roles or positions. How can you navigate that? Or Yes.
Yeah, that's a good question, Kendall, and I'll take a stab at it, and I know Adrian will have some good insight on this as well. One thing that we didn't talk about in this presentation, and I think it's important as an early careerist, a mid-careerist, and even a more senior, is mentorship and sponsorship. So as soon as you come into an organization, I think it's very important that you identify a leader that exhibits the behaviors that seem to be rewarded in that organization, and develop a relationship with that leader, develop a mentorship with that leader. And I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I need to follow up with one of my, I just wrote that down. I need to follow up with one of my mentees and one of my mentors. But that's important. That helps you, because a lot of times when you're new, you can ask those unorthodox questions, those questions that may be, uncomfortable to ask in your leadership hierarchy, the unspoken rules, right? You can ask that of your mentor, and they can give you good counsel. And then seeking a sponsor is even, at a higher level, right? Because that sponsor can block and tackle for you and help you chart a path in the organization, right? So understanding who can be your sponsor, who can be your mentor, making sure that you identify early on those leaders that have been successful and rewarded for their behavior, and gravitating to them. And then I will also say, find an affinity group, a resource group. We have a resource group in our organization for aspiring leaders, both that are men and women of color. And I would encourage you to get involved in those types of diversity, equity, inclusion infrastructure groups, because a lot of times that gives you exposure to senior leaders in the organization. It also gives you encouraging words around development, around personal brand, things that we just talked about today. And that's also a community of support for someone that's newer in the workforce. Adrian, anything you would add to that?
No, I think you nailed it down. I was going to mention the ERGs, and only thing I would add is, folks, again, Fernando said this was kind of a Vegas conversation. Visibility doesn't always equal credibility, right? It's a matter of how you show up. So Fernando can give you an olive branch and let you in the room and give you a seat at the table. But if you're not prepared to be at that table, or you show up the wrong way because you don't have the emotional intelligence to be able to read the room. So you have to know what you're prepared for. And you really need somebody in your organization that's willing to spend the time. But in the mentee mentor space, I put a lot of pressure on the mentee. Show up with the agenda. Send it to me ahead of time. I shouldn't have to do a whole lot of work. You pursued me. So let's be fair. If you want this opportunity to become promotable, you got to own it.
Good question.
Great question.
If there's one last chance to asking for questions, if there are any questions to be asked. Okay. Okay, I guess. Thank you, Adrian and Fernando, for this great presentation. I'm sure the attendees and myself have learned much from both of you. I was like, yes, thank you for this presentation. If you would like this presentation will be shared after it has been concluded. And if that's all, we'll like to thank you and conclude this webinar.
Thank you very, very much for having us.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Kendall.
The opportunity.
Thank you.
Brother Adrian, as always, it's a pleasure, sir.
Fernando, always, man.
All right.
Thank you.